afternoon, and welcome to the Leadership Learning webinar series. This series provides monthly learning on relevant business topics like today's topic, managing performance for blended, virtual, and co-located teams. I am Natalie Corrado, the Program Manager for Corporate Learning Solutions at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. We at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management are proud to be hosting today's program. Lake Forest is an independent, accredited institution with over 50 years' experience at providing practical business leader education. This education comes in the form of graduate degrees, certificate programs, and targeted training and development through our Corporate Learning Solutions programs. Corporate Learning Solutions specializes in developing corporate managers and leaders by combining relevant content with the expertise of our business leader faculty to provide customized training, consultation, coaching, and organizational development services to our corporate clients. We are grateful for the sponsorship and generosity of our client and longtime supporter of the school, Trustmark and the Trustmark Foundation. Trustmark provides access to a full spectrum of flexible benefit solutions, including health plan administration for self-funded employer groups, payroll-deducted voluntary products, group medical benefits, and health and fitness management programs. We're able to bring this webinar to you on a complimentary basis as a result of Trustmark's support. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Corrine Miller, our facilitator for today's session. Corrine has been a faculty member at Lake Forest Graduate School of Management for over 15 years. She teaches communication and innovation for our Corporate Learning Solutions. She is founder and principal consultant at Innovating Results. She consults, trains, facilitates, and coaches on virtual communications, managing a virtual workforce, virtual teaming, and innovation. She has over 25 years' experience in engineering, learning and development, program management, business operations, quality, and innovation. Corrine, we're pleased to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I'm so happy to be here again. I love our interactive webinars with our LFGSM participants. And I just want to let everybody know right away that if you do have any technical issues, you can go ahead and directly chat with Natalie Corrado. You'll see her in the list. So go ahead and do that. And if you would, please give me a green check if you can hear me, and a red check, excuse me, a red X if you cannot hear me. Obviously, you're reading that off the slide. And if you would do that, please, on your WebEx panel to the right and not click on the slide itself. So I'm looking for a green check from everyone to make sure that you can hear me. And it looks like we're getting a lot of green checks, so that's awesome. Yay, yay, and more yay. All right, that's great. Thank you so much. All right, so last thing I'd like to do to prep us for getting started is to make sure we have the best speed possible for our session. If you would go ahead and close all your other apps, not the WebEx app, please, but just all the other apps that you have open. That'll help our speed and give you a great experience today. And if you want to have a piece of paper and a pen ready, and let me know when you're ready to start by a raise of your hand. So I'd like you to raise your hand. You'll see that on the right, next to that green check that you used a few minutes ago. Yay, good. Everybody's finding the hand because this will be a highly interactive session. So this helps us to get started a little here. And I'll let you know that I have a little bit of a cold today, but I'm going to do my best to make sure I articulate my words very carefully and that you can hear me very, very clearly. All right, let's get going here. Here's how we're going to interact today. Remember, I mentioned this is a highly interactive webinar, and we have a little under 60 minutes, which isn't a lot of time, but we're going to pack a lot in during this time. You will be using the raise hand, the yes or no, like you already used. I'll ask you to use the emoticons, which are also in that bar. There will be 2 polls. And believe it or not, even with the large group that we have here, we're going to have a little bit of chaos and a little bit of fun, and I'll ask you to use an annotation tool later on, and I'll give you some instructions on that. And last but not least, please feel free to chat me any questions that you have in the chat box, and I'll do my best with the large group that we do have to see if I can see some trends and so forth. With our questions, I will stop at a couple of points and answer questions, and also we'll have some chats, and I'll be asking you some questions, and you'll be able to use that chat box. So starting with the chat box, could everybody just let me know and let everybody else know on the session, from which town or city are you joining us? So let's have, oh wow, we're getting people from all over, many, many states and also many towns. I'm seeing New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, North Carolina, South Carolina. That's great. This is so cool. Michigan, Kansas City, Minnesota. Ooh, Minnesota, I've got some friends up there. Brr, Bree, pretty cold and nice and warm, hopefully, in California. And all my in-laws and family in Florida. I see Boca Raton. Oh, so we have folks from all over. That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm going to throw a poll up here real quick. And this is my last thing that I would like to know about you. How many years have you managed or been part of a blended team? And I'm going to use the term blended today, meaning virtual and co-located. So we know we've got people from all over, which is neat. And we know that we have people from all different levels of experience. It's looking, I'll show you when we're done with the poll, I'll show you what everybody has said here. Right now, we've got trending pretty closely, but the 8+ is going to 50%. Oh, wow. Well, you know, I've been doing this despite my youthful appearance in that picture early on, a long time. And I had a lot of global teams back in the day when I worked for many large corporations. And so I understand what it's like back in days when, if you're old enough to remember 125 baud rates, when people were trying to work remotely. Okay, so you can see that we have mostly people, 51% 8+, and 37% 0 through 2, and 39% 3 through 7. So we have a nice mix. Those of you that have a lot of experience, feel free to use that chat box and add anything, you know, so that everybody else can benefit from your knowledge as well. Okay, well, we have 2 learning objectives for today. One, in this brief time that we have, I want to give you a little bit of a way of thinking about this blended stuff, because, you know, a lot of people don't talk about the blended, virtual, and co-located. They talk about virtual, but those of us that have lots and lots of experience in these blended situations where you have some folks in the office and some folks that are in other offices and other places, as well as telecommuters and field and working from home and so forth. And I'm going to suppose in this session that the manager is at a facility. You know, certainly the manager could be other places as well, but I'm making an assumption because my experience has been that mostly my customers have the managers, when they do have a blended team, a lot of times they are in the office or co-located themselves. And the second objective for today is to give you some practical methods and techniques, because that's what we're all about at Lake Forest. We want to make sure that you leave with something tangible. I'm going to focus in specifically on the performance management piece of this blended team. You know, we could, I actually do a whole day session in person around these virtual management, but just for our 1 hour, I'm going to give you a little bit of a sample here of just in the performance management piece. And I'm going to talk about you as a manager as well as the performance management of the team. Now, I know we're in lunchtime in the central time zone here, but I am just going to give you a little appetizer portion for today of these different things. Like I said, we could talk about this stuff for a whole day or 2 days, and it's a lot of fun when we do. But in our 1 hour today, I'm going to try to give you just some key points to take away. And the points I want to give you are in these areas: setting objectives, assigning work, doing the work, monitoring the work, and handling performance issues. So we're going to be moving fast, and those are the 5 areas I'm going to give you just a little bit of a sample of takeaway in. And you'll see as we move through here that I will show you where we're at all the time, highlighting the section and letting you know what's coming next, which is a really big part of virtual training, right? I also teach virtual communication and virtual training. Now, there is a tendency to treat these blended teams the same when they should be treated differently. So in other words, the virtual and the co-located should be treated the same, and a tendency to treat them differently when they should be the same. So it gets very confusing at times, and I'm hoping to really nail this for you. And no, we won't be receiving the slide deck when we're done. Someone asked that question. Okay, so let's start with imparting a way of thinking. Imparting a way of thinking. 3 things: what's the same, what's different, and what's the price of blended? You know, we think about all the time that we're gaining a lot of value from having virtual and blended and co-located and all this, and it is. There is a great value to it, but there's also a price to it as well. So just starting with what's the same and what's different. Let's think about this for a second. You know, on the left, as you can see here, is how teams used to look, and now some folks are remote. Someone might be telecommuter, someone might be flexing, have flex hours, someone might be in the field. And you know, those management principles are the same, no matter if we're co-located or we're virtual. However, the management techniques to be successful are sometimes very different. So the principles: yes, we need to plan. Yes, we need to organize. Yes, we need to staff, direct, and control, reward, and recognize. But the way we do it, just think about rewarding and recognizing alone, you know, what the differences are when we're having the pizza party co-located and our virtual members are not included in that party. So we'll talk about the performance management piece of this as we move forward. There's a lot of self-awareness that has to happen when you have a co-located and a virtual team. And it's all about understanding how we're operating so much with hidden assumptions and so subconsciously that we don't even know what we're doing. And our eyes are a big part of it. We are so driven as humans by what our eyes are seeing. And our eyes are seeing, and we're going to mention this, and I want you to hold on to this for a moment. And as we move through this, think about and reflect, what are my eyes seeing that are making my behavior different, or how should my behavior be different? And then price. Remember, I talked about there's a price to this. There is anybody who tells you that managing virtual is easy and doesn't take more time is lying to you or ignorant. It takes extra time to manage a virtual team and to manage a blended team. It absolutely does from a management standpoint. And it also takes more time as a team member in interacting and dealing with the workflows and so forth. We do gain a lot of benefits, as we all know, but this idea that this stuff is easy isn't true. And we have to throw away a lot of the paradigms that we've come to believe in and really adopt some new ones. So this is just a little bit of getting us warmed up around specifically around a way of thinking. A way of thinking about this. Now, I just covered the idea of same management principles but different techniques. The idea that our eyes are so much a part of how we are not handling the differences between these two teams properly and the price of doing business at this. So if you would, in the upper left corner where you see that arrow, if you would grab that, go ahead and click on that arrow and click on which one of these three things did you find most interesting so far. And you only have one arrow, but this is a great way to, and I hope you pick up some techniques that I'm using in this virtual session that you might want to use in your virtual sessions as well. Yeah, I do very typically get a lot of interest in both the area around the eyes and the price tag on this stuff. It really takes a lot of self-reflection, and I hope to help you with that. Someone is saying that we're not having any sound. I'm going to go back to our raising of the hand. Do me a favor, raise your hand if you can hear me. I just had someone chat with me that there's no sound for most of the audience. So please raise your hand if you can hear me. So I have 86 people who raised their hand and counting, 98 people. Okay, we're good. I'm sorry, Charlene, I'm not sure what's happening. Maybe you should chat with Natalie on that, and maybe she can help you out. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so lots of interest around the eyes. Great. Right. So next, let's go to some tangible methods and techniques. Let's talk about setting objectives. Most of the time, we set objectives when we're in a co-located situation. I know a lot of us great managers also will focus both on work and skills and behaviors. But I have to tell you that a lot of times my experience with this over the last 30-some years is that people focus on the work component of setting objectives. When you have a blended team and you're setting goals and objectives, you have to also include the skills and behavior part, and mostly for the collaboration and communication and teaming piece of it. Super, super important. So it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's a huge deal in having the right skills for this. Now, when we go to thinking about the work piece, give me a check if you think that setting objectives for the work component would be the same for virtual versus co-located, and give me an X if you think that you would be setting objectives differently. So the same or different. And go ahead and click that on the right side of your screen, not using your pointer, but using the green check or the red X on the side of your screen. So same or different. And you could kind of, think about this. You can kind of see it either way, right? But what I'd like to share with you is that, and it actually can be very different. And let me give you an example. I had one customer who was rolling out some new tools to their virtual folks. And the virtual folks were in a customer-facing customer service situation and were required to meet some metrics, performance goals. And because they had new tools and they had a learning curve for a quarter, they were not held to the same metrics that the folks who were co-located and had the working tools and had a well-oiled machine. So there are situations where they can be different, either in virtual or in co-located. But sometimes we think, hey, the work is the work, and we don't think about the environment and the capabilities that each of the teams have. So that's one thing I want you to really think about, is what are those resources and environment, and how do they impact the performance? So in the write-up for today's session, in the brief that described it, it said I would be giving you some questions. So here is a question. Does the virtual environment impact the potential work performance in any way? That's something you need to ask yourself, especially as a manager. Now, around the skills and behavior piece of this, regarding skills and behavior, go ahead and chat with me if you would. What might be different for skills and behaviors for virtual workers versus co-located workers? What might be some differences in how you might develop their skills? Yeah, absolutely. Professional appearance, will, unless you're on video, will be very important for co-located. And time management, while it's important certainly for our co-located folks, it's even more critical because when we're virtual, we don't have the cadence of a physical environment that kind of carries us through the day. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about cadence. And I'd like you to all watch the chat box now and see what your peers are saying, because there's great learning from each other. Yes, collaboration tools, building relationships without being in the office is a tremendous skill. And that brings us to making sure you've recruited the right people to be working virtually. Thank you for that. Thank you. Very good. Now, this price tag piece of it comes in the setting objectives. Now, all of a sudden, you have to sit back and think about this more carefully. Now you don't just have employees of different functions and skills and responsibilities and roles. Now you have this additional dimension. Now you have another dimension. Are they virtual? Are they co-located? It's almost like you have to add another tick in the box to tick in the employee records, because there is a difference, and we have to take this into consideration with our objectives. Similarities and differences, thought through really, really carefully, really carefully. This is huge. Okay, the next piece, oh, we have yes, a couple people added a couple things. Managing the perception that people who work from home are not really working. And Eileen, I am so glad you mentioned that, because we are going to talk specifically about that. That is one of my hugest pet peeves. And so thank you for mentioning that. Okay, assigning work. Boy, now, why are we even talking about assigning work in this situation? This is something when I have this, when we do an in-person all-day training session on this and we have some case studies and so forth we go through, really, really eye-opening. People realize very interesting things. So let me start with a poll. Let me open our second poll here, and this will be just our final poll. We'll have other ways to interact during the rest of our session. But I'd like to know what you think. What's the biggest problem when managers of blended teams assign work? And I'll give you a minute to read that. What's the biggest problem? And go ahead and use the poll, if you would, versus the pointer. The poll should be open. And we're trending right now with 57, 59% around C. And we've got about 30 people yet to log their response. Remember I said we're driven so much by our eyes? And a lot of you clicked that earlier saying that that was very interesting. So yeah, a lot of self-awareness about our eyes. Think about our eyes in terms of assigning work. So most say they don't differentiate between virtual and co-located when they assign work, that is the biggest problem, and I'll show you the results right now. You should be able to see those results. 74% said C, that they don't differentiate. And we had 45% around B and 6 for C. So guess what? This is really amazing. You guys voted the highest for C, but what really happens is B. They give the difficult work assignments to the co-located workers. And why do you think that is? Anybody want to chat? Why do you think that is? Yeah, we had our highest percentage for C and then B and then A. We had around 70-some% for C. So why do you think? Yeah, out of sight, out of mind is one of them. And there's a huge, huge fear component, okay? Fear. Fear. Like I wrote on the screen, managers have an issue with giving any kind of work assignment that may have, and I want to be specific, okay? Any kind of work assignment that might have high visibility or be complex or critical is when they have a problem giving it to co-located workers, because they like to watch it get done, Lynn. Absolutely, she nailed it. They like to watch it get done, and they like to be there to kind of see, you know, is there activity going on? Because heck, if my reputation is on the line, as I've delegated that, and like Elaine said, control, Cynthia, easier communication, and many of you other folks said similar things. But here's what happens when you do that. There's a waterfall effect. This is bad, because when you don't give the tough assignments or the high visibility or complex, you're not giving developmental opportunities to the virtual folks. You're not giving them opportunities to be seen politically, perhaps, so forth and so on. So you're really disadvantaging them tremendously. Now, of course, if the manager is virtually located, that is a different story, and you're absolutely right, Bob. I don't know if you were with us when I mentioned at the beginning. I'm mostly going to be talking about when a manager is co-located. But thank you, Bob, for adding that, because when the manager is virtual, this starts to have a normalization effect. Yes, and virtual employees will have less opportunities for advancement because of this. Absolutely, positively. And that's why I'm raising this awareness. You have to get over the fear. And managers will say, but. And I'll say, fine, if you have a fear factor, then go ahead and monitor them. Go ahead and give them a coach if you need to. Do what you need to do, but don't not assign them the work. So the question, am I assigning work based on capability, ability, availability, visibility needs, developmental needs, or some other reason? Right? Question. It's a reflection thing again. A reflection thing again. There's a lot of reflection in this management stuff in blended teams. Okay. Now let's talk for a moment. Yeah, okay, Yoko brought up an interesting thing. Yes, capability is important, and that's why you always have to make sure that there's a capability. And if not capability, do you need to develop your virtual employees, and are you inhibiting them by not assigning them things that will build their capability? Thank you, Yoko, absolutely. Okay, doing the work. It's not technically part of managing performance, but I do want to mention communication, because it's so important when we're doing the work. When you have physical team meetings, co-location, employee stops by the manager's desk, the manager stops by the employee's desk. There's informal meetings in the hallways. There's informal peer meetings across the cubes and in various other areas. This provides a great amount of communication that we don't even think about, that the virtual folks have no access to. Unless, of course, you're at the team meeting and you have them WebExed in. But in some of these other situations, people go, well, what am I supposed to do? Stop talking to my neighbor or whatever. No, what you need to do as a manager is make sure everyone is aware that when they have these types of one-on-one meetings or hallway meetings, that they actually think, it's an awareness thing. You think about whether the virtual folks need to be part of that. And if they do, you pick up the phone and you get them on with you. And if they don't need to be in that moment, make sure you're communicating if they're involved later. And if they're not, they're not. That's not a big deal. But virtual folks get very also feeling a little bit left out when managers are having conversations, which are normal in the co-located workspace. You know, they're feeling maybe I'm not having that advantage to build that relationship with that manager because I can't walk by their office and come in and have a cup of coffee informally. So managers have to build that into the day with those employees. Again, a whole new cadence has to be formed with the virtual so that there's some equality around building these relationships. And your virtual employees cannot become an afterthought. And like Pat said, instant messaging helps a lot too. And 30-minute WebEx meetings are phenomenal. Actually, 15 is even good too. And more IM discussions, Larry. Thank you for adding that. Am I marginalizing the virtual team? That's a question you have to think about as a manager and as a team member as well. Am I marginalizing the virtual team members with synchronous communication in real time? Right. Great question we need to ask ourselves. Building trust is a big piece. We all heard this trust piece. And I want to give you some very, very practical tips about how to build in trust between the co-located and the virtual team. Number one is your workflow. Look at how there's task interdependence. Depending on time zones, right, you have to take that into consideration. If your time zones are 12 hours apart, certainly that is a big part of designing the workflow so that we're not holding people up. On the other hand, there is a way to balance task interdependence so that people are forced to work together and build relationships and build trust. So actually being purposeful about thinking about the workflow. A lot of times we actually just take the workflow we've had always and put people virtual and never go back and look at that workflow. Is it optimized for a blended team? And Charlene brings up a great question. How important is it to understand their technological capabilities? Absolutely. That is also part of the workflow issue, making sure that we're not giving somebody something that needs to be physically signed, although today we're good with electronic signatures, but in the old days we used to have workflow issues around that. Then there's something I'd like to tell you and introduce to you. I don't know if you've heard this. It's called the say-do ratio. If you do what you say you're going to do, that builds trust. If your say-do ratio is not absolutely 100%, something is going to go wrong with trust, especially in a co-located team. And I actually, if you visit me on LinkedIn, I wrote an article about the say-do ratio and how you can actually keep your say-do ratio for yourself for a week and see how trustworthy you really are. Doing what you say you will do is the #1 thing with trust, and managers holding employees accountable for that, and yourself as a manager have to be a role model. Significant time zone differences with these techniques is absolutely an issue, so thank you, Bob, for mentioning that, as certainly with task interdependence, certainly not with the say-do ratio, and not with the manager's response. If you don't hold people accountable to this and call them out on it, this will all break down. So the question is, does the workflow design consider virtual resources in interdependent tasks? And of course, the other dimension that Bob added about different time zones and capabilities of folks and all these other dimensions that we would talk about in our day session are super important in this. I'm going to take a pause right now and just ask, are there any more questions that are popping into people's heads that you want to throw into the chat box? When we have a large group of people, it's just impossible to be able to use voice. And Elaine adds, follow-up is also important to build trust. Yes, do what you say you're going to do. If you're going to follow up, tell people you're going to follow up and then follow up. So follow-up itself is a great thing, but I would add to that, tell people you're going to follow up and then follow up, because that action reinforces trust. Then they know, okay, she cares, he cares. And perfect instructions are critical, and I do a whole session online about clarity in virtual communication, and that is a big piece. But today we're focusing on performance management, and it is impossible to over-communicate. There's a lot of great tips that are coming up in our chat box. I hope that you'll learn from those as well. So thank you, everyone, for adding those, because you're helping with our learning today. And yeah, expecting time zones to work outside of their normal time, especially I know how many days I was up in the middle of the night with China in Europe. So are there specific tips for when the manager is remote and the employees are co-located? That's a different session. Today I'm focusing on when the manager is co-located, but I'll try to give a couple of tips along the way on that as well. And also, if those on our session can give some tips, Megan, go ahead and watch that as well. So in the chat box, tell me, how do you know that virtual workers are making progress on objectives? So Ben's saying we track metrics. What else do we do? Let's hear from some folks we haven't heard from. How do you know they're making progress when they're virtual? Meeting with them on a regular basis, report tools, yep, CRM tools. So we're looking, I'm seeing a trend of metrics and meetings. Yeah, metrics and meetings. You're also going to get some feedback from peers, somebody mentioned. I want you to notice what I did not ask here. I did not ask, how do you know the virtual workers are working? I didn't ask, how do you know they're working? And I specifically don't ask this question that way, because then I get this from so many managers that are co-located. How do you know that they're working when they're at home, or they're in the field, or they're at another facility where I can't see them? There goes that I again, right? There goes that I. How do you know? So how do you know? And you said metrics, right? Metrics, meetings, trust is important, right? Okay, but here's the deal. I'd like you to look at your screen for a moment. I'm going to ask you to please raise your hand when you're done reading what's on the screen. So raise your hand when you're done reading what's on the screen. Okay, great. Now what I want you to do is one more time, I want you to read what's on the screen and raise your hand when you're done. Okay, so almost 100 of us have read both of those. Interesting, isn't it? This is a big problem. This is a big problem that we have. The problem is around trust. So many times in my sessions, in my coaching, managers over the last 10 years have said to me, well, I tried to call her, or I tried to call him, or I IM'd him. His IM said that he's online, but he didn't answer the phone. I tried 10 minutes later, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, if you walked over to somebody's desk, would you be thinking that there's sinister things, that they're goofing off? Why are you thinking that? Oh boy, here we go again with the I. Here we go again with the I. If you can't see them, and I'm going to make this cross-eyed right now because that's how crazy this makes me. And yes, having an away message on AM helps a lot, but it is common behavior. And we need, as managers, this is one of the biggest things to get over, is to really stop assuming because your eyes can't see someone that they're off goofing off somewhere. This is so cool stuff when you look at the psychological pieces of it. And they may not respond by mobile phone if they're in the restroom, or they've had a family emergency, and so forth and so on. I would like you to think about managing by results, like many of you have mentioned about metrics, but make sure they're metrics that measure the progress of work and not just the time in work per se. And it does come back to that say-do ratio. Absolutely, Ron. Thank you. So manage by results, and that is a hard thing for some of us to do. However, there's a certain amount of trust that we have to have, and a lot of you have been mentioning that as well. But I want you to trust but verify, okay? But verify. And how do you verify? How do you verify? Here's what I'd like you to do. Tell your virtual employees, I trust you. Just like your co-located ones. I trust you. If I don't see you at your desk, I'm not thinking you're off goofing off somewhere. And one of the biggest things you can do is establish how monitoring will occur with your virtual folks. Virtual folks tell me all the time, I feel like my manager is spying on me, or I feel like they're monitoring me in sinister ways, or this metric and that metric. Well, that all goes away when you work together to decide how is the work going to be monitored, and you make an agreement. It's that trust, it's that say-do. You're going to establish it, and you're going to do what you say. This is one of the biggest things people say helps the relationship and helps with the manager and monitoring work. Figure it out together and verbally establish, put it out there, lay it on the table, how monitoring will be done. And if it's, hey, we're going to have a meeting, or hey, I've got these metrics, I'm not spying on you, but these are the things I'm going to use. Does that make sense to you? And they may come back and say, hey, that metric's not the right one, but this other one is really better. So do it together. Now, I mentioned this word cadence a few times, and I really would like you to just kind of close your eyes for a moment and picture the cadence of how an office works. Are your eyes closed? Okay. think about the picture how an office works. You come in the morning, you sit down, you chat with some people, and may have a cup of coffee, you say hi to people, you're working, you have a question, you lean over the cube, then it's lunchtime, everybody kind of goes to lunch, da-da-da-da-da. It's the end of the day, people start to drift off. There is, even with a 24-hour flex schedule, there is a certain amount of cadence during core work hours. The virtual folks don't have that cadence in their physical environment. They have it on their online environment. But what you might want to think about, managers, is how to be more formal and deliberate about creating a cadence with the virtual environment. So when you're in the morning saying hi to someone, maybe I am your virtual folks, say good morning. See how you can duplicate that cadence using the tools that you have to give that virtual employee that same feeling as we have with our co-located. And yes, you can get more work done when there aren't interruptions, but it also can be inhibiting to not be with the rest of the team when you might be able, when you have to do work that might be teamwork, or you have to regularly consult people. So it can kind of go both ways. And yes, they do develop their own cadence in a virtual environment, but I'd like you to link that cadence to the overall team and have both be on a similar cadence that way. So our final piece of this are performance issues, which are always really, really tough to do. So the question is, how do you know there's a performance issue, regardless if the employee is co-located or virtual? So if you would chat with me this final time here and let me know for this final section, how do you know there's a performance issue? Doesn't matter if it's co-located or virtual. So, yep, feedback from others, goals not being met, missed deadlines. By the time you see missed deadlines, it's can potentially, depending on how your milestones are set, not be a good thing. So here's the big message with this piece of it. Hard to believe, but once I tell you, you'll say, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. You might not have thought of it. Recognizing an issue when the employee is virtual because we don't have our eyes is harder to do, even though we have metrics and meetings. So for the virtual workers, even if you have an inkling that something just isn't right performance-wise, you have to react quicker than you would in the physical environment, because in the physical environment, you really do rely on your eyes in perceiving, walking around, kind of seeing what's going on, talking to people, and so forth and so on. So for virtual, I want you to react quicker. If there's no issue, that's great. There's no issue. But the time to react has to be so much quicker because, again, you don't have that eye going on. So we've taken care of just an appetizer portion, and you know, you mentioned so many things in the chat box that I wish we had so much more time, and we do cover in the day class to go over this. So I wish we had more time, but I did give you an appetizer flavor of many of these things, and I want to go back to time, resources, skills, and tools. There is a price to this stuff. It is hard. It takes a certain type of awareness and a certain type of manager to deal with this. Certainly, like I think it was Bob said, we could talk for a moment about if you're a manager who's virtual from your co-located folks. Really difficult. And depending on your budgets, it's use some of that money to FaceTime, travel, get there, see them. Of course, use tools like Skype and FaceTime and video and WebEx and whatever tools you have as well. There's always nothing is ever going to be as good as being totally in person with everyone. And that's okay, because we're giving up something for getting some other grander things in return. So I want to go back for just a moment here and look at the 5 things that we covered today. It was our very small appetizer piece. Setting objectives. Remember, work versus skills and behavior. Set them differently based on environment, and make sure you're doing skills and behavior. Number 2, assigning work. Make sure if all the capabilities are there, that just because something's complex or a little scary for you to give a virtual worker because you can't see them, please be self-aware of that. Doing the work, communicating, letting the virtual worker know what's going on. Number 4, monitoring, having them involved in how work will be monitored, and really, really acting quickly on performance issues. Even if you have an inkling, jump on it right away. So out of these 5, I'd like to know if you have any specific questions or comments. If you would, go ahead and chat that. And also, if you would, with your arrow in the upper left corner, point to the one that is something you might not have thought of before, or was just maybe a reminder about something that we need to remember. It was a good reminder about something, or something you had, and point to the one that is the best for you there. And, sometimes we just need to be aware of what I picked out for these areas here with our sampler for today were the ones that managers tell me were the biggest help to them. So I'm glad that some of these are resonating with you. That's awesome. Very good. Thank you for that. Now, self-awareness. Sometimes we don't have a lot of time to think, but self-awareness as a manager and a team member in that environment is so very critical. And managers' diligence, this stuff is tough. I have some managers that find it very useful to put notes around, to put pictures of virtual employees, to make sure that co-located employees have pictures or names of people they work with, and all kinds of different things we could talk about in another session to remember them. So we've checked off our way of thinking and given you 5 practical methods and techniques for today. And on this note, I'm going to say to Natalie, if she wants to go and grab this for us and take it away. And I want to personally thank Trustmark Foundation for these wonderful webinars that you bring to the Lake Forest Graduate School of Management participants and guests here today.
Yes, thank you, Corrine. That was a great sampler of information. Again, today's program was part of the Leadership Learning Webinar Series delivered to you by Lake Forest Graduate School of Management, and it was made possible by our sponsor, the Trustmark Foundation. Again, our deepest thanks for their support. We value your feedback. Please click on the link in the chat box to answer a brief survey. We use that information from the survey to continually improve our sessions. Our next webinar is in January. Our CEO, Jeff Anderson, will be facilitating. The topic is, Are You a Leader? Registration links will be emailed out soon. With that, we'd like to end the session and wish you a productive rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.